Hey everyone, I thought we'd do quite a fun but sciencey themed video today, and we're going to be looking at this great post that I found on Reddit this morning when I woke up. You guys know I love Reddit, I constantly browse it. And on Ask Reddit this morning, I found this question that was, you're given the opportunity to perform any experiment regardless of ethical, legal or financial barriers. Which experiment do you choose and what do you think you'd find out? I thought this would make a really, really cool discussion topic. We could have a look at some of the answers that people gave and ideas for experiments. And I thought that if we if I talk about them in this video, and then in the comment section, you guys can let me know what you think would happen. Also, let me know what your answer would be for this. So imagine there's no ethical problems, no moral or social boundaries, no financial or legal boundaries. What experiment would you do? What would you want to try and find out? How would you try and find it out? I think it's such an interesting question to ask because there's so much we can find out through science, but there's also so many limitations because, while it might be really, really interesting to see, how would living in this situation affect a child, or how would living in this situation affect an animal, or this, you can't perform those experiments because they're cruel and people get hurt or animals get hurt or things like that. Sometimes there's just logistical barriers, sometimes there's economic barriers. So this is like a kind of bit of fun to say, what would you want to try out if you could? So the first answer from the thread that I want to talk about is one that I think my sister would be really, really interested in. This person suggests, take a group of unrelated, completely monolingual adults, all of whom speak a language from a different language family, and have them form a little society. Give them whatever they need, just so long as they have to work together. Could even be a reality show or whatever, just see how long it takes to produce a language they all speak. I suspect it wouldn't take too long. I think this would be a really interesting experiment to see happen. I think there are kind of some cases where with some languages, they do have really similar words. So pineapple in so many different languages is something like ananas, but I don't know how that differs between language families, and I don't quite have enough knowledge of languages to kind of be able to hypothesize what would happen, so maybe some of you guys can help give an idea of that there. But personally, I can see kind of language being sort of secondary and people starting to communicate more in kind of like signs and sort of sign language and things like that. If one person stood there saying bowl, bowl, it doesn't really mean anything, but if they can go bowl, and then from then on, other people will be like, when they want a bowl, and I can see kind of non-verbal communication becoming more of a thing. I mean, eventually, after generations, maybe a whole new language would form, or rather a language that's like a mix of all the other languages, if that makes sense. But I think in the beginning, and definitely for the first few generations, non-verbal communication would definitely be the way they would communicate. And I'd just be really, really interested to see what would happen. I think power dynamics would come into it as well. I think the more dominant figures would definitely kind of dominate in terms of language and try and make everyone speak their language a little bit more. I'd also be interested in the kind of psychological effects on people, because if you're basically just communicating in very basic words or signs or whatever, or by pointing, you can't really have deep, meaningful conversations. You can't tell people how you're feeling when you speak completely different languages and just can't really get each other. So on the one hand, maybe you'd have people understanding each other more based on how they look and their mannerisms and their facial expressions, or maybe you just have people feeling really isolated and lonely all the time. I would be really, really intrigued to see what would happen there. And maybe you get someone who's really stubborn, who is just like, I'm gonna stick with my language, and even if it isolates myself, The next one I talk about is more of a fun one, and just because I'd be really, really intrigued what I do in this situation. Make people believe they're about to get murdered by a serial killer and have them chased to see if horror movies are right and people's running skills and critical thinking really goes to poop when in complete panic. I always have nightmares and dreams where I have to run away from people, and often they're in familiar sort of settings and stuff. So often I dream I'm back in Penistone where I grew up, or sometimes I'm around the streets of Lewisham and there's someone chasing me and I have to run away from them. And everything feels so real. So all the regular rules of physics and stuff apply in my dreams. And there's no magical climbing up buildings or anything. It's all very kind of grounded in reality, and I have to run away and hide in real spots and stuff. And it all feels very tense and very scary. So based on my dreams, I think I might be a bit screwed. But based on the times when something really bad has happened and I've had to stand up for myself and or other people and kind of, you know, get in the middle of things and whatever. I do think that maybe with that adrenaline kick, I wouldn't be quite as useless as I think I am. So I would be very intrigued to see how I'd cope in this situation. Let me know in the comments how you guys think you would cope in this situation. I think from a kind of purely experimental perspective, it could be really, really interesting to see how people act, especially if they're told there's like a group of them. Would people kind of weed out the weakest links in order to like try and ensure their survival? Or like, I don't know, what would happen? Is there a certain type of person who does really well in like life or death situations like that? And if so, how could we use kind of this knowledge of people? Like, are they the kinds of people we recruit for like armies and police forces and stuff like that? Or I don't know, it sounds like a really silly kind of thing, but I think it's the kind of experiment that would be really useful, but also completely psychologically damaging. People would have PTSD after it for sure. Then there's a whole thread of people wanting to do a lot of the experiments from the like Vault Tech experiments in Fallout. So people mention the ones where they have Vaults 68 and 69, where it's like one woman and 99 men, or sorry, 999 men, or one man and 999 women. All I would say is, regardless of how the power dynamics are, if any of them have children, there are going to be some serious interbreeding and genetic issues further down there. That is for sure. This one I found really interesting, and it kind of follows on from Monday's video, right? It reads, raise a child telling them ugly people are super attractive and vice versa. Isolate them from media or input fake media to add to the illusion. Does he or she still get attracted to conventionally attractive people, or do they get more turned on by the people we deem as ugly? This will be really, really interesting to see kind of how innate versus learned beauty standards and attraction and so on is. I do find this really interesting. I've always wondered myself how much my own preferences are kind of influenced by the people around me. For example, I hate the fact that my roots, which a lot of you have pointed are coming through and showing quite badly in certain lights, I hate that my natural hair is kind of blondish, so I dye it dark brown because to me I perceive brunette hair as more attractive. My boyfriend is a brunette. I like dark-haired guys. Is that because, you know, genetically I just happen to be attracted to dark-haired people, or I just think dark hair suits me more? Or is it to do with the fact that, I don't know, I was subconsciously told dark hair was attractive as a child in some way, or I looked up to people who had dark hair? Or is it because, you know, all the silly jokes about how blonde people are dumb and brunettes are smart? Was that kind of implanted in my head? So I find smart people attractive, therefore I find brunettes attractive? I don't know. I just think it would be really, really interesting to kind of have an actual experiment where we figure it out. And that one seems like it could be a little bit cruel in terms of, you know, are we manipulating someone's preferences? But I do think it would be interesting to know how much of someone's attraction and beauty standards are nature versus nurture. And if we do find those out, how much could we manipulate people from a young age? Like, from a kind of marketing and sales standpoint, that kind of experiment and the data we get from it could be so useful, but also it's kind of terrifying to think how much we're already manipulated by marketing, advertising, and just the media in general and so on. But then, I'm rambling and trailing off here. Point is, I think it would be an interesting one. Oh my god, right, this next one is one that this would be so unethical, so horrible. Also, the financial implications would be crazy, but it would be such an interesting one. Listen to this, right? DNA is a spaghetti code of the worst kind. Like, everything is a global variable, and the conditions of the environment you run it on are more important than the code itself. What's the minimal amount of DNA to make a viable human? Can it be refactored to be simpler and more adaptable? And what does all the rest of the DNA do? Is it just legacy code, or does some of it only turn on in specific cases like viral infection or too much iron? The whole thing about what's the minimal amount of DNA to make a viable human, that kind of got me asking so many questions. And you know, it all comes back to this idea of like what makes a human, which is a big thing that came up in certain episodes of the Here and How podcast. It's a big discussion that came up with Alex and Stephen in the abortion debate. And I think the whole idea of like what makes a human does all come back to biology. A big chunk of that is in the DNA, obviously. I think questions like what makes a human can be seen as like philosophical questions, but ultimately I do think it all comes back to biology. Like, it comes down to the DNA and what's in our brains and so on. And you can say, you know, a human's only a human with a consciousness, but then consciousness comes down to the brain and how the brain is structured and works and functions and so on. So let's take a completely like out there hypothetical experiment that could never happen in real life, but let's imagine it did, right? If we get some DNA and we change it like one base at a time, and so let's start at one end and we change a base and then we see what it grows into, and then we take that same DNA and we change one more base and see what it grows into, and we do this like, at what point does it stop being human? Or like, how many bases can we change before it stops being human? What if we cut out that bit of code but not that bit? Is it still human? Like, at what point is it unable to reproduce with another human? What bits of the DNA specifically make someone human or not human? And how do we define that within like how we work as a society? Like I'm probably rambling here and I'm not giving a lot of answers, just asking a lot of questions. But it just, it would be so interesting to me. And if you do take two people with identical DNA that's been like altered in some way, like, is it possible to make one of them into a human by how you raise it or not? I don't know. And again, that comes down to the whole nature versus nurture thing. It's just, yeah, there are so many like potential experiments and questions and things we could do, but so many of them are just impossible to do because of the logistics or because of the implications and, you know, the whole moral and ethical thing. And how so there's actually talk in this thread as well about the experiment where a man raised a little baby, I think it's like a chimpanzee, at the same time as he was raising his human son to try and see if, you know, how human the chimp would behave. Turns out the human started behaving more like the chimp, and they were kind of like talking in their own little chimp way. So I found that interesting. And again, that's something like I would love to have seen carried on. I would love to know what the results would be, like especially as they both hit kind of like puberty age. But obviously it was getting to a point where it was potentially really damaging to the little human baby, so they called it off. In reality, we can't do experiments like that, but hypothetically in our minds, ooh. We can do anything and question anything. I'm reading a really good book at the minute called Gather the Daughters, and it's probably one of the most disturbing books I've read in a while, but it's so good. It's, I don't want to say too much without giving away spoilers, but I thoroughly recommend it. It's about this little society living on an isolated island, and it's incredibly sexist. The men are the head of the household, but also the head of their daughters, and that includes raping their daughters from a young age. It's horrific. And then as soon as the girls hit puberty, they're shipped off to go get married and pop out babies, and, you know, by 30, pretty much everyone's a grandmother. And then when they're useless and can't do anything anymore, they're killed. And it's really horrible. It's a really interesting commentary on gender roles and family structures. It's a really interesting commentary on religion. It's an interesting little commentary on cults. And just lots and lots of things. It's a really, and also, you know, the story is gripping, but it's a really good book and I thoroughly recommend it. I'm not done with it yet, so I can't say how the ending is, but so far, really enjoying it. I'm thoroughly, oh, this one's a great idea because of the last bit, right? And it comes back to this whole what makes a human thing. Isolate half of the people in the world from the other half for 10 million years, then reintroduce the populations and see if they can breed. If they can't, have them debate about which group is human. Oh, I would love to see that happen. I mean, I would hate it, but I would also love it. Anyway, I'm going to stop this there before the video gets too long. If you want to read the rest of the thread and all the amazing replies that people have put together, I will link it down in the description below for you to go and find out. Let me know in the comments what experiments you would want to do or see the results of if money and logistics and ethics were no object. And let me know what you think would happen in so many of these situations, especially the language one. If you guys know anything about language, because I'm useless, my sister's the one who's good with language in my family. But if you have any ideas what would happen there, let me know that as well. But thank you so much for watching today. Sorry I kind of did a PewDiePie with the whole, you know, stealing unoriginal content from Reddit thing, but... But no, I did enjoy this. It's something that's kind of like brought up a lot of questions, and it's mostly been a video of me like asking things and kind of getting excited about the what ifs. But I've kind of enjoyed it and it's been fun. So let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching today. I'll see you guys again soon. Thank you so much for watching today. A huge thank you goes out to everyone supporting me on Patreon this month, including Gambit and the Chauffeur, Deshauwn, Mark Dauner, Christian Berg, Rachel B. Royer, Jadeon Sheppard, Pizelated Skeptic, Jaylee Moore, Religion's BS, Sir Michael Moore, Matthew Minamar, Sage Villarreal, and Greg Ladd. Don't forget to check out all my merch available over on Teespring and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me in the future. Thanks a lot, guys.